Deep beneath the ancient sands of Mesopotamia, something was never meant to be found. A structure older than empires, a staircase of gods, a temple built to touch the sky. But under the massive ruins of the ancient Ziggurat of Ur, archaeologists discovered something that should not exist. A sealed chamber, no records, no inscriptions, no warning, and inside it, a human body, not buried in chaos, not destroyed by time, but preserved as if it was waiting for 4,600 years. And what they found next changed everything we know about early civilization. Long before the modern world learned to measure time in calendars, borders, and empires, there existed a city that seemed to rise directly out of myth rather than history, a place called Ur, where civilization itself was still learning how to speak, write, and worship, and where every stone carried the weight of something far older than memory. In this ancient world, Ur was not simply a settlement of humans struggling to survive, but a powerful center of belief, authority, and sacred order, where kings ruled not just by strength, but by divine approval, and where priests were seen as intermediaries between the visible world and the unseen forces believed to govern the heavens, the earth, and everything in between. At the heart of this city stood a structure so massive and so deliberate that it seemed to challenge the very sky above it, the Great Ziggurat, a stepped monument built layer upon layer of mud brick and time, designed not as a home or fortress, but as a sacred staircase intended to connect humanity with the divine presence believed to dwell above the clouds. This was the Ziggurat of Ur, a monument dedicated to the moon god Nanna, where rituals were performed with strict precision, where offerings were made with silent devotion, and where every level of the structure was believed to represent a step closer to the realm of gods, as if climbing it meant ascending beyond human limitation itself. Yet beneath its majestic surface, beneath the ceremonies and chants that echoed across its terraces, there lingered an uncomfortable silence preserved in ancient whispers, a sense that not everything about this structure had ever been fully revealed or completely understood, as though parts of its design were intentionally left unexplained, even to those who built it. Ancient traditions hinted at something unsettling hidden beneath its foundation, suggesting that certain lower sections were never meant to be entered or even fully documented, and that specific chambers were sealed with such deliberate care that their existence faded from official memory, surviving only as fragments of oral warning and cryptic interpretation. Archaeologists studying early Mesopotamian records often found references that did not align with architectural reality. Vague mentions of restricted zones, forgotten sanctuaries, and buried foundations that seemed to exist outside of normal religious explanation, as if someone in the distant past had made a conscious decision to erase part of the structure's true purpose. Over time, these inconsistencies grew into questions that could not be ignored, because the more researchers studied Ur, the more they realized that the ziggurat was not just a temple of worship, but possibly something far more complex, something engineered with layers of intention that extended beyond religion and into the realm of secrecy itself. And yet for thousands of years, no one had the means to confirm what lay beneath its massive base. No one had the tools to look through the packed earth and sealed bricks that held its deepest secrets in place, and so the mystery of the lower structure remained untouched, preserved by both time and silence, until modern archaeology arrived, and for the first time in over 4 millennia, human eyes prepared to look beneath the foundation of one of the oldest sacred monuments ever built. When modern archaeologists finally set foot on the ancient grounds of Ur, they did not arrive with expectations of myth or mystery, but with scientific tools, careful methodologies, and the belief that even the oldest civilizations would eventually yield their secrets through structured excavation and rational analysis. Yet almost immediately, the site began to resist explanation in ways that no one had fully anticipated. The initial layers of the excavation revealed what was already known from historical records: carefully arranged mud brick architecture, ceremonial platforms, and the remains of rebuilding phases that stretched across different dynasties. But as the team moved deeper toward the base of the structure, subtle inconsistencies began to appear that did not match any documented restoration pattern from ancient Mesopotamia. Sections of foundation stone were discovered that did not align with the rest of the construction, not only in size and composition, but in the method of placement itself, as though different hands, from a much earlier and more forgotten period, had contributed to the base before the recognizable form of the ziggurat was ever completed. This is the point where the structure of the Ziggurat of Ur began to feel less like a continuous architectural monument and more like a layered construction of unknown phases, where each layer seemed to belong to a different time, a different intention, and possibly even a different cultural understanding of what the structure was meant to be. What disturbed the researchers most was not just the presence of older bricks, but the fact that these bricks were embedded in a way that suggested deliberate concealment rather than simple reconstruction, as if the foundation had been reinforced around something that was already there long before the recognizable temple ever existed. There were no clear access routes leading to this deeper section, no stairways, no shafts, and no documented entry points in any surviving inscriptions or site maps, which meant that whatever lay beneath had not been part of the public or ceremonial structure at all, but something isolated from the rest of the architectural system. As the excavation expanded, ground-penetrating radar scans were conducted across the base of the ziggurat, and the results introduced a level of uncertainty that quickly shifted the atmosphere among the research team, because beneath the solid mass of earth and brick, the instruments revealed a perfectly defined hollow space, sharply rectangular in shape, too precise to be natural and too intentional to be accidental. The void did not resemble collapse or erosion, but rather an enclosed chamber, sealed on all sides, with structural boundaries that suggested careful planning and controlled construction, as though whoever created it intended it to remain untouched and undisturbed for an indefinite span of time. Even more unsettling was the way the chamber appeared to be buried beneath multiple structural phases, meaning it had not been exposed or altered by later civilizations, but rather preserved beneath successive layers of rebuilding, as if every generation that added to the ziggurat had unknowingly or deliberately protected something beneath their feet. At this point, the team began to realize that they were not simply excavating a temple, but approaching something that had been intentionally hidden within its foundation, something that had survived not because it was forgotten, but because it was carefully sealed away from every era that came after its creation. And so the excavation strategy changed, shifting from general exploration to controlled and cautious exposure, because whatever lay beneath the Ziggurat of Ur was no longer just an architectural curiosity, but a potential sealed chamber that had remained untouched for approximately 4,600 years, waiting in complete silence beneath one of the oldest sacred structures on Earth. By the time the excavation reached its most delicate stage, the atmosphere around the site had changed completely, shifting from routine archaeological work into something far more tense and uncertain, where every decision carried the weight of consequences that no one could fully predict, because they were no longer simply uncovering ruins, but approaching a space that had remained sealed since a time long before recorded history could confidently explain it. The team established strict protocols before attempting any direct breach, documenting every layer of material, mapping the exact composition of the sealed section, and reinforcing the surrounding structure to ensure that no accidental collapse would disturb what lay beneath. Because the chamber detected under the Ziggurat of Ur was not just another architectural feature, but a perfectly enclosed void that had resisted the passage of time for thousands of years. As they began carefully removing the outer sealing materials, they encountered something unexpected almost immediately: a hardened layer of ancient clay mixed with bitumen, applied with a level of uniform precision that suggested intentional sealing rather than structural reinforcement, as if the builders had not only closed the chamber, but actively engineered it to remain airtight and inaccessible for an unknown duration. Each removal of material felt less like excavation and more like violation, because the deeper they went, the more evident it became that this space had not been abandoned through collapse or natural decay, but deliberately locked away, preserved beneath layers of human intention that had survived across entire civilizations without interruption. Days passed in controlled, painstaking effort, and as the final barrier slowly gave way, the temperature around the opening shifted in a noticeable way, not dramatically, but enough to be recorded by instruments and felt by those standing nearby, as though the sealed environment inside had maintained its own isolated condition, untouched by the external world for millennia. Then came the moment of breakthrough, when a narrow opening finally formed in the last layer of sealing material, and for the first time in approximately 4,600 years, air began to move between the interior chamber and the outside world, releasing a faint, stillness-laden pressure that carried no smell of decay in the way one might expect, but instead a strange neutrality, as if time itself had paused within the space. Silence fell over the entire team as they widened the opening just enough to allow light to enter, and when lanterns were lowered into the darkness, they revealed walls that were remarkably intact, smooth in structure, deliberately constructed, and free from the collapse patterns typically associated with ancient subterranean chambers. The interior did not resemble a tomb filled with disorder or destruction, nor did it show signs of looting or disturbance, but instead appeared as a carefully arranged enclosed space, preserved with an intention so precise that it immediately raised questions about its original purpose, because everything about it suggested control, order, and finality. And then, at the center of the chamber, the light revealed a shape that did not belong to stone or debris, but to something unmistakably human in form, positioned with deliberate placement, surrounded by silence so complete that even the smallest movement felt intrusive. At that moment, the realization struck the team with full force that they were not looking at an empty archaeological void, but at a sealed environment that had contained something or someone since the earliest phase of Mesopotamian civilization, hidden beneath the foundation of the Ziggurat of Ur, waiting in absolute darkness until modern discovery finally broke the seal of time itself. The moment the lantern light fully settled inside the chamber, everything the team thought they understood about the excavation began to collapse into uncertainty, because what they were seeing was not simply an archaeological remain, but something positioned with a level of intention and preservation that did not match any known burial practice from early Mesopotamian civilization. The human form lying within the sealed chamber beneath the Ziggurat of Ur was not scattered, disturbed, or reduced to indistinct remains as one might expect after thousands of years, but instead retained a structured placement that suggested careful arrangement, as though the body had been placed there with purpose, rather than simply interred after death. There was no chaotic sediment collapse around it, no evidence of intrusion by later civilizations, and no signs that the chamber had ever been reopened or tampered with, which made the condition of the remains even more difficult to interpret, because it suggested a level of isolation so complete that time itself seemed to have been held back from the space. The positioning of the body was not random, nor aligned with typical burial orientations used in known Sumerian or Akkadian practices, but instead appeared centered and deliberate, surrounded by a quiet arrangement of clay vessels placed in a near-circular formation, as if the space had been designed not merely to contain a body, but to define its presence within a controlled spatial ritual. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the absence of any accompanying royal artifacts, inscriptions, weaponry, or symbolic treasures that would normally identify status, lineage, or historical context, because ancient burials of importance in Mesopotamia were almost always accompanied by objects meant to signify identity or honor. Yet here there was nothing but silence and structure. Radiocarbon analysis conducted on surrounding organic traces placed the chamber at approximately 4,600 years of age, aligning it with the earliest phases of the ziggurat's development, yet no known historical record, king list, or administrative archive from Ur mentioned any individual matching the presence or conditions of this burial. This absence of documentation created a contradiction that quickly became the central mystery of the excavation, because in a civilization as meticulously recorded as ancient Sumer, even minor officials and ritual figures were often documented in some form, yet this individual appeared completely absent from all surviving records. The preservation of the remains also defied typical environmental expectations, as the sealed chamber had created a stable microenvironment that limited external decay processes, resulting in a level of preservation that was unusual enough to raise questions about whether the sealing was accidental, environmental, or deliberately engineered to maintain the integrity of what lay inside. As researchers carefully documented every detail, the emotional tone of the excavation shifted noticeably, because this was no longer just a discovery of an ancient burial, but the realization that someone had been placed here in a way that separated them entirely from historical recognition, as if their existence had been intentionally removed from collective memory. And standing within the silent chamber beneath the Ziggurat of Ur, surrounded by untouched darkness that had lasted longer than most civilizations, the team began to understand that they were not simply studying an ancient body, but confronting a sealed question that had been left unanswered for more than 4 millennia. waiting beneath stone and earth for someone to finally break its silence. After the initial shock of the discovery faded just enough for systematic observation to resume, the team began shifting their focus away from the body itself and toward the surrounding chamber walls, because in archaeology, context is often more important than the object at the center, and in this case, the environment surrounding the remains beneath the Ziggurat of Ur felt deliberately designed to communicate something that had survived longer than the civilization that created it. At first glance, the walls appeared plain, constructed from the same ancient mud brick composition found throughout early Mesopotamian architecture, but as the lighting angle changed and dust was carefully cleared from the surface, faint irregular markings began to emerge, not carved in the decorative sense, and not written in any recognizable script used in later Sumerian records, but instead etched in a way that suggested repetition, emphasis, and intentional placement. These markings were not storytelling inscriptions like those found on royal steles or temple records, but something far more abstract and unsettling, consisting of repeated angular patterns, segmented lines, and directional formations that seemed less like language and more like coded structure, as if they were meant to regulate behavior, restrict movement, or define boundaries within the chamber itself. The longer the team observed them, the more a disturbing realization began to form, because these symbols were not randomly distributed across the walls, but placed in deliberate sequences that aligned with the chamber's geometry, suggesting that every marking had been positioned with awareness of spatial control rather than artistic expression. Some researchers initially attempted to interpret the markings through known linguistic frameworks, comparing them with early cuneiform evolution patterns, but no consistent translation could be established because the structure of the symbols did not conform to phonetic, administrative, or numerical systems known from Mesopotamian archives, making them effectively unreadable in conventional terms. Instead of conveying information in a traditional sense, the markings appeared to function more like environmental instructions, almost as if the chamber itself had been designed to enforce a condition rather than narrate a history, and this shifted the interpretation from archaeology into something closer to ancient engineering of psychological or ritual restriction. As documentation continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. Certain symbols repeated near the floor level, others aligned with the ceiling line, and some were placed directly opposite each other across the chamber, suggesting a structured system of containment or balance, as though the space was governed by rules encoded directly into its architecture. This led to an emerging theory among the team that the chamber was not simply a burial space, but potentially a containment chamber, designed to isolate whatever lay within from both physical access and symbolic recognition, effectively erasing its meaning while preserving its physical existence in silence. What made this even more unsettling was the realization that the chamber had been sealed not just physically, but conceptually, because there was no cultural memory of it, no reference in temple archives, no mention in administrative tablets, and no surviving oral tradition that hinted at its existence, as if it had been intentionally removed from the narrative of the civilization that built the Ziggurat of Ur. The researchers began to consider whether the chamber was part of a controlled ritual system, one in which certain individuals or objects were not meant to be remembered, but instead deliberately hidden beneath sacred architecture to prevent later generations from questioning their purpose or significance. This theory, while controversial, gained traction as the spatial logic of the chamber became clearer, because everything about it, from sealing technique to symbolic markings, suggested intentional suppression rather than abandonment, meaning that someone, at some point in the distant past, had made a conscious decision to erase knowledge of what was placed inside. And as the team stood in the dim light of the sealed void, surrounded by symbols that no known language could fully explain, a deeper question began to form, one that no one wanted to ask aloud, but everyone was already thinking: was this chamber meant to protect something, or was it meant to contain something that was never supposed to escape? As news of the hidden chamber beneath the Ziggurat of Ur slowly spread through academic circles, the excavation stopped being viewed as an isolated archaeological discovery and instead became the center of an increasingly intense debate that reached historians, anthropologists, epigraphers, religious scholars, and experts in early Mesopotamian ritual systems, all of whom recognized that the implications of the chamber extended far beyond the discovery of a preserved body. Because the deeper researchers examined the structure, the more impossible it became to dismiss the idea that the chamber had been integrated into the original conception of the ziggurat itself, meaning that whatever had been sealed beneath the foundation was not secondary to the monument, but fundamental to its purpose from the very beginning. This realization altered the entire framework of interpretation surrounding the site, because ancient temples were traditionally understood as places built to honor deities, consolidate royal legitimacy, and organize ceremonial life. Yet the existence of a hidden, undocumented chamber beneath the sacred structure suggested that another layer of purpose had always existed beneath the visible one. Some scholars argued that the burial belonged to a forgotten ruler or priest whose memory had been erased during political transition, pointing to examples from other civilizations where dynastic struggles resulted in intentional historical removal. But this explanation quickly encountered problems because even erased rulers usually left traces behind in damaged inscriptions, altered records, or secondary references preserved through administrative archives. In this case, there was nothing. No scratched names, no fragmented references, no overwritten records, only absence. And in archaeology, total absence can sometimes be more disturbing than evidence itself. Other researchers focused instead on the chamber's ritual geometry, noting that the body's placement aligned with architectural axes that connected directly to the upper ceremonial levels of the ziggurat, creating a vertical relationship between the hidden chamber below and the sacred platform above, as though the structure had been designed around a concealed center that ordinary worshippers would never see. This led to a theory that shocked even experienced historians, because it proposed that the chamber represented an early form of foundational ritual burial, not symbolic in the modern sense, but functional within the belief systems of ancient Mesopotamia, where certain individuals may have been placed beneath sacred structures to bind spiritual protection, divine authority, or cosmic balance directly into the architecture itself. The theory sounded extreme at first, but fragments of supporting evidence began emerging from comparative studies across ancient civilizations, where scattered records hinted that some monumental structures were believed to require consecration through human presence, sacrifice, or ritual sealing beneath their foundations, creating a permanent spiritual anchor between earth and deity. Yet the chamber beneath the Ziggurat of Ur appeared different even from those examples, because of the extraordinary effort taken not only to bury the individual, but to erase all cultural memory associated with them, suggesting that the person sealed within may have occupied a role too sacred, too dangerous, or too politically sensitive to be remembered openly. As this possibility gained attention, researchers began re-evaluating long-ignored myths surrounding early Mesopotamian temple construction, particularly stories describing sacred boundaries, divine wrath, and rituals performed beneath the first stones, phrases that had previously been dismissed as symbolic language, but now seemed disturbingly literal in light of the chamber's existence. The excavation team itself became increasingly divided. Some members insisted on maintaining purely scientific interpretations, arguing that extraordinary conclusions without definitive proof risked turning archaeology into speculation. Others believed the chamber's combination of concealment, preservation, symbolic encoding, and architectural integration pointed toward a deliberate ritual system that modern understanding had only partially recovered. But the most unsettling aspect of the debate was not the disagreement itself. It was the growing realization that ancient civilizations may have possessed systems of belief far more psychologically and ceremonially complex than modern people often assume, because the chamber suggested that the builders of Uri were not simply constructing monuments of worship, but engineering sacred environments where architecture, astronomy, ritual, memory, and secrecy operated together as a single unified system. And within that system, the hidden body beneath the ziggurat may not have been viewed as dead in the ordinary sense at all. Instead, some theorists proposed that the individual represented a permanent presence embedded into the structure, a silent intermediary between the earthly city and the divine order above it, sealed beneath stone, so that the power of the temple could remain stable across generations. The more researchers analyzed the chamber, the more deliberate its design appeared. The clay seals were layered with mathematical precision, the wall markings followed repeating geometric intervals, the body placement aligned with celestial calculations. Even the chamber dimensions themselves appeared proportioned according to ratios later associated with sacred Mesopotamian architecture. Nothing about it felt accidental, and that frightened people. Because if the chamber truly represented an intentional ritual foundation hidden beneath one of the oldest monumental structures in human history, then it meant the origins of civilization may have involved practices, beliefs, and systems deliberately concealed from later generations. As media coverage intensified, public fascination grew rapidly, with documentaries, historians, and independent researchers proposing increasingly dramatic interpretations of the discovery, some claiming it proved forgotten spiritual technologies, others suggesting suppressed knowledge about ancient religion, while more extreme voices framed the chamber as evidence of forbidden rites intentionally buried beneath the beginnings of civilization itself. Professional archaeologists attempted to remain cautious amid the speculation, but even they could not ignore the central mystery that remained unresolved. Why would an entire civilization build one of its greatest sacred monuments over a hidden chamber while simultaneously ensuring that no historical memory of it survived? That contradiction became the defining question of the excavation, because concealment on this scale required planning, it required authority, and above all, it required intention passed across generations of builders who continued expanding the Ziggurat of Ur without ever exposing what rested beneath it, which meant the secret had not been forgotten accidentally. It had been protected through architecture, protected through silence, protected through time itself. And as scholars continued debating the meaning of the hidden chamber, one final possibility began emerging quietly among the research team, a possibility so unsettling that few were willing to discuss it publicly. What if the chamber beneath the ziggurat was never intended to be rediscovered at all? What if the greatest achievement of its builders was not the monument that rose toward the heavens, but the secret they successfully buried beneath it for 4,600 years? By the time the excavation entered its final analytical phase, the hidden chamber beneath the Ziggurat of Ur had already transformed from a regional archaeological discovery into an international historical mystery, one that forced researchers to reconsider not only the origins of the structure itself, but the deeper intentions of the civilization that built it, because every new layer of evidence seemed to point toward the same disturbing conclusion. The chamber was never an addition to the ziggurat, but the reason the ziggurat existed in the first place. What began as isolated architectural curiosity slowly evolved into a pattern too precise to dismiss, because advanced structural mapping revealed that the hidden chamber sat at an exact geometric center beneath the monument, aligned with foundational load distributions and ceremonial axes in ways that could not have occurred accidentally through later modification. This meant that the builders who designed the earliest phase of the structure had full knowledge of the chamber's existence before the first monumental layers of the ziggurat were ever raised toward the sky. The implications of this realization were enormous. For decades, historians believed that the Ziggurat of Ur developed gradually through ordinary expansion and dynastic rebuilding, but the chamber suggested a radically different possibility, one in which the sacred monument may have been intentionally constructed around a concealed core from the very beginning, transforming the entire ziggurat into a kind of protective shell surrounding a hidden secret beneath it. As researchers expanded their analysis, astronomical specialists were brought into the investigation to study the orientation of the chamber in relation to celestial movement, particularly because the structure had originally been dedicated to the moon god Nanna, one of the most important deities in Sumerian religious life. The results introduced another layer of mystery. The body within the chamber was not positioned randomly, nor merely aligned with the architecture above, but placed according to a highly precise astronomical orientation corresponding to specific lunar cycles visible during the era in which the structure was first built. This was not symbolic coincidence. The alignment was mathematically deliberate. During certain periods of the lunar calendar, moonlight would have traveled across the upper ceremonial axis of the ziggurat in direct correspondence with the hidden chamber below, creating a vertical connection between the heavens above and the sealed burial beneath the earth. The meaning of this alignment became the subject of intense debate because it implied that the chamber formed part of a ritual cosmology in which celestial order, sacred architecture, and hidden burial were interconnected elements of a single ceremonial design. In ancient Mesopotamian belief systems, celestial bodies were not distant objects in space but manifestations of divine authority, living powers that governed fate, kingship, agriculture, war, and human destiny itself. And if the chamber beneath the Ziggurat of Ur had been aligned deliberately with lunar movement, then the individual sealed within may have held a role tied directly to that cosmic system. This possibility deepened when microscopic analysis revealed traces of rare mineral compounds embedded within the chamber sealants, materials not commonly used in ordinary construction, but known to appear in certain ritual contexts, associated with purification, preservation, and sacred enclosure. The more evidence accumulated, the more impossible it became to interpret the chamber as an ordinary burial. Everything about it suggested design, purpose, control, and above all, permanence. Because the chamber had not merely been hidden beneath the structure, it had been engineered to survive. The ceiling layers resisted water infiltration with extraordinary effectiveness. The load-bearing distribution protected the void from collapse. The positioning beneath the monument ensured that generations of rebuilding would reinforce rather than expose it. Even the absence of inscriptions now appeared intentional, as though the builders wanted the chamber physically preserved, while simultaneously removing it from historical memory. And this led researchers toward the most disturbing interpretation of all. The chamber was not forgotten, it was intentionally erased. At some point in the distant past, individuals with immense authority made the decision to preserve the hidden burial physically while destroying or suppressing any public knowledge connected to it, creating a paradoxical system in which the secret would survive materially but disappear culturally. This level of coordinated concealment suggested something far greater than isolated ritual practice. It implied institutional secrecy embedded into the earliest stages of civilization itself. Because protecting such a secret across generations would have required continuity of knowledge among priests, architects, rulers and builders who participated in the expansion of the ziggurat, while ensuring the hidden chamber remained inaccessible and unspoken. And perhaps most unsettling of all was the realization that the concealment succeeded. For 4,600 years, entire empires rose and collapsed above the buried chamber. Languages evolved, religions transformed, kingdoms vanished into dust. Yet the sealed void beneath the Ziggurat of Ur remained untouched beneath the earth, surviving wars, floods, invasions, and the collapse of the civilization that created it. That endurance forced scholars to ask a question few were comfortable confronting directly. What kind of belief system inspires people to hide something so completely that even history itself loses memory of it? Some theorists argued that the chamber represented the physical embodiment of a forgotten covenant between rulers and gods, where the hidden burial functioned as a permanent spiritual anchor, securing divine favor for the city above. Others proposed darker possibilities, suggesting the burial may have involved ritual sacrifice, sacred kingship, or ceremonial confinement tied to concepts modern civilization no longer fully understands. There were even theories that the individual beneath the ziggurat was never intended to be remembered as a person at all, but transformed symbolically into part of the monument itself, absorbed into the sacred identity of the structure through ritual burial beneath its foundation. In this interpretation, the body was not beneath the temple. The body was the temple, a hidden core embedded beneath stone and earth to give the monument spiritual legitimacy and cosmic permanence. As controversial as these ideas sounded, the excavation provided enough evidence to prevent outright dismissal, because the architectural, astronomical, and ritual integration surrounding the chamber displayed a level of sophistication that exceeded simplistic explanations. And so the debate continued, expanding beyond archaeology into philosophy, theology, and the psychology of ancient civilization itself. Because beneath the technical analysis and historical arguments lay a deeper and more unsettling realization. Human civilization may have begun with secrets intentionally hidden beneath its greatest monuments. Not everything built in the ancient world was meant to be understood by future generations. Some structures may have functioned as containers of protected knowledge, sealed memories, or sacred truths deliberately concealed beneath visible religion and public ritual. And standing at the center of this possibility was the silent figure hidden beneath the Ziggurat of Ur, preserved in darkness for nearly 5 millennia, while the world above changed beyond recognition. The excavation eventually concluded, but the mystery did not. The chamber was documented, analyzed, and partially resealed for preservation, yet no definitive explanation ever emerged capable of answering every contradiction surrounding the site. Who was the individual buried there? Why were they hidden rather than honored? Why did no written memory survive? Why was the entire monument aligned around the chamber with such extraordinary precision? And perhaps most haunting of all, what else may still lie hidden beneath the foundations of the ancient world, waiting silently beneath stone and sand, while humanity walks unknowingly above it? Because the discovery beneath the Ziggurat of Ur revealed something far greater than a preserved body or forgotten chamber. It revealed the possibility that history is not merely incomplete, it is intentionally buried, and somewhere beneath the ruins of the first civilizations, other sealed truths may still remain untouched, hidden in darkness, waiting for the moment when humanity becomes ready or reckless enough to uncover them again. Civilizations do not disappear completely. Even when their temples collapse, their kings turn to dust, and their languages fade into silence, fragments of their secrets continue waiting beneath the earth, hidden beneath stone, sand, and the weight of forgotten time. For thousands of years, the Ziggurat of Ur stood beneath the burning skies of Mesopotamia like a silent witness to humanity's earliest dreams of power, divinity, and eternity, while deep beneath its sacred foundation, a hidden chamber guarded a mystery that survived longer than empires themselves. A sealed void, a forgotten body, a truth erased from history but never destroyed. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all, because the ancient world was not primitive in the way modern people often imagine, but deeply symbolic, deeply ritualistic, and possibly far more secretive than we are willing to admit, capable of creating monuments whose true meanings were concealed beneath layers of religion, architecture, and silence. The preserved figure hidden beneath the ziggurat may never reveal its identity completely. Its name may remain lost forever. Its purpose may continue to divide historians and archaeologists for generations to come, but its existence alone forces humanity to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if history only remembers what ancient civilizations wanted us to remember? And what if their greatest secrets were never written in books or carved into stone, but buried beneath the foundations of the world itself? Because somewhere beneath the ruins of forgotten cities, beneath temples consumed by sand, and beneath monuments worshipped for thousands of years, there may still exist chambers untouched by light, sealed by hands long turned to dust, carrying truths capable of changing everything we think we know about the beginning of civilization. And perhaps at this very moment, the earth is still hiding countless silent witnesses from humanity's first age, waiting patiently in darkness for the next discovery to awaken them once again.